All right, so we're gonna do components as a service tonight. I've given this talk a couple times. Has anyone know what components as a service means? Jesse, my fellow Irishman, knows. Okay, anyone else? Okay. So it's a thing that I'm sure other people have done, but when I was on a really large team before, and we came up with this pattern that they got us some performance. So a little bit about who I am. Google developer expert. I co-organize ngconf with Joe. I work at a company right now called SaltStack. Has anyone heard about SaltStack? Yeah. We have a really cool enterprise app, and we're hiring for Angular engineers. We're doing all the coolest, latest stuff, so if anyone's interested, shout out. We're also hiring for QA. So I know this isn't the QA meetup, but if any of you guys have QA people that you like and you want to refer, we're looking for some awesome QA people. So yeah, that's just a plug for SaltStack. Quick shout out. So as I was getting this talk ready, had a couple questions. Getting it to work in back then it was Angular 2 was a little tough, and so I had some people help me figure some of these concepts out. Brokey was the first one. If you guys aren't familiar with Mike Brockie, he's on the Angular CLI team. He's awesome. Justin Schwarty, he also helped. If you're not familiar with him, he runs the Angular Air video podcast. He's on the Narwhal team as well. And then Jeff Cross, former Angular team member also. He's the CEO or CTO. He's co-owner of Narwhal. So these are some of the guys that ruminated and bounced some ideas with me to get some of this stuff ready. So a little bit about where components as a service comes from. So has anyone used this hashtag before, perf matters? Any perf junkies, JavaScript perf junkies here? People that spend their time performance. JSperf.com. Yeah. So if any of you guys are like JS perf junkies and you're trying to figure out why is my app slow, and you're getting into some really niche scenarios, that's where this talk came from. Like that's where I was mentally when this talk kind of was born. So I was on a team with 65 front-end engineers, and we're all on the same single-page app. So there's not like multiple bundles. There's one bundle going on here between all of us engineers, and there's over 1 million lines of pre-compiled code of just ours, not even our vendors. It's a big app. And obviously we start to see some performance problems. And this stuff can get out of control quick. Someone can check in one change one day, and all of a sudden the app's slow, and with 100 commits a day, who knows where that came from. So it can get out of control, and so some of these patterns help with that. So before we get into what a component as a service is, let's talk about how do we get in Angular and Angularjs. This talk is geared for both Angularjs and Angular. So just so everyone's prepared, we're going to see code for both tonight. I know that some of us here are on the new Angular, raise your hand. Some of us still work with the old Angular, raise your hand. Yes, we still. So there's going to be examples for both. And so it's the same in both, but when you want to put a thing in the browser, in the window, how do you make it appear in the screen? What do you add it to? You put it somewhere. In your view, like you add it to your view, right? So you put it in your template, and then Angular makes it appear, yeah? It's one of the cool things about Angular, right? I asked the question, and you're like, that's such a dumb question. It's like obvious how it happens. Why are you even asking? It must be a trick question. No, yeah, you put it in your template, and Angular's like, all right, here we go. And it appears on your screen. So, all right, yeah. Angularjs is mostly British, yeah. So yeah. So instead of just simply throwing it into your declarative markup and letting Angular process it and munge it and decide, hey, I know what you meant here. I see the ifs. I see what's going on. I'm going to put this out there. With components as a service, you call a service and say, hey, make this thing and add it to the view, and then the service takes care of it for you. So instead of just throwing it into your template and having it appear, you're going to make a service call. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the difference on how you're going to get the things in your markup with components as a service versus regular components. Yeah, hand raised.
So that means that you're lazy loading your views?
You could. This will work with lazy loaded stuff, but it doesn't mean lazy loading like files. I'm gonna go into it. You'll see. By the time I'm done tonight, you're like, okay, I get it. I know what he's talking about. All kind of at a high level, it means to get a thing into your DOM, into your view, you're calling a service. Now in Angular, this will work with native script as well. Like this doesn't just have to be an HTML thing. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of the distinction between regular Angular and components as a service. So when you're looking at your app and you're like, hey, Frost just talked to me about components as a service. I don't know if it's one of those knee-jerk things that I should go add to my app, or if it's just like a fad. Let me give you some symptoms that you can see in your app that may help you decide, hey, I might need to look at this components as a service thing. So let me go over some of these symptoms. So does anyone know what first meaningful paint is? Yeah, have you guys ever debugged your first meaningful paint? So when our app loads, we all have like some sort of CLI build, Webpack or Angular CLI or Grunt or Gulp or something. And it's delivering a pretty sizable JavaScript bundle and a pretty sizable CSS bundle as well. And the browser's going to download that, parse it, and then it's going to try and start putting things in the DOM. But it has to first download it, and then it has to like parse the whole thing. Now, if your first meaningful paint is 6 or 7 seconds on a local network, I mean, your users are screwed at that point. Your users, especially if they're on a mobile device, like they're just going to close your app. But so that's a symptom. If you have a horrible first meaningful paint, there's some other things you need to do that I'll talk about in a second, but that's a symptom you might want to look at. Another one is if changing routes are slow. So one of the symptoms I saw when I was in the belly of the well and I was looking at this stuff was it took longer to tear down the old view than it did to set up the new one. Okay? And that was when I knew I was in a dark place. Like my team had done something clearly wrong when it was harder to just get rid of stuff than it was to think and build like logically new things. So that was another thing that I saw. It's a symptom I thought, hey, I should share this with people. So if you see that, if you click and it takes a second to change views, you can get in there and investigate. Was that second the ruining of the old view, the creating of the new one? Was it network latency? If it's the ruining of the old view, then you're going to have some things that this talk tonight's going to help with. Memory usage. So in your app, as you click around, if you click back and forth between two screens, the memory should remain linear, true? If you don't have any memory leaks. It shouldn't, every time you get a new view, it shouldn't increase the memory usage of the page, right? You should stay on a linear usage of memory. So if you're clicking around and you go to 10 pages in a row, and then you just repeat the same thing, if you don't have a linear memory usage, and you should, then there's some things in this talk that are going to help. You have a performance problem, you have a memory leak problem. So that's what that means. So if you're one of the cool kids doing CSS transitions the old way with like keyframe animation and like you're not using a fancy library to do it, and they're less than perfectly smooth, which they should be perfectly smooth. I mean, we're all using MacBook Pros or something equivalent, yeah? Like on our developer machines, they should be smooth. There's no excuse. We're all using Chrome, yeah? No one's developing in like an 11, an IE 11. So yeah, your CSS transitions should be smooth. And if they're not, and there's nothing you can figure out how to do to get them smooth, you might have too much stuff going on your page, and this, what I'm about to show, along with some other strategies, can help get your CSS transition smooth. For AngularJS people, raise your hands again, just so I can remember the audience. All right, not an insignificant amount of people. Have you ever counted how many watchers you have on the page at a time? Have you ever used any of the utils that show you the number of watchers you have? Should we play a game? Who has the most watchers? Who has the most watchers? Just shout out the number that you know.
We have one page with, was it 97,000?
He wins. I don't think anyone's going to beat that, right?
But it was a page that was really horrible.
Yeah, it wasn't optimized at all.
Last place I was at had like 200 plus thousand.
On a page it wasn't?
Yeah, it was like a scheduler page, and like if you broke it down 15-minute increments, it's like every one of those increments for like so many columns. Anyways, it was awful.
Wow. You guys work at horrible companies. Just kidding. Yeah, that's scary. That's scary. Anyone else? Something similar or comparative? All right, we all know. You don't have to tell us. That's bad. These guys that were brave, and that's bad. And there's others of us that are that bad too. Okay. If you have a ton of those, and your page just barely started, like they haven't even begun to click on things, you're in a bad spot. Some of these things I'm going to show tonight are going to help you out. I don't know why bending over would make a noise, but they found me. I'm a robot, Joe. Okay. So if you have a lot of non-visible components turning on, like if I have to click and then other things appear, if those non-appeared things are turning on when the page loads, and there's a lot of those, you're going to have some performance issues. Can anyone think of some things that don't appear but are on the page at the time? Anyone give some examples? Modals are the obvious one, right? Flyouts. Some accordions, tooltips. Anything else? Drop downs, yeah. All these things. They're like they're not visible, but they initted. Like they turned on, they're sentient, they're waiting for more instructions, right? If you have a lot of that, your page is going to slow down and there's nothing you can do, okay? And some of these things we're going to show tonight can help fix it. So let's talk about some things you can do to fix the problems we just talked about. Because perf matters. Everyone should care about perf. If you're at a company that doesn't have a perf person, you should feel lucky because you're now the perf person, okay? And that's awesome to be the perf person. Trust me, it is awesome to be the perf person. The first thing you can do is start lazy loading some of your app, right? If your app takes 7 seconds to turn on, it probably needed, less than a fifth of the total CSS that it downloaded, and probably less than a fifth of the total JavaScript that it downloaded. To do your first meaningful paint, it didn't need as much as you actually sent down. Lazy loading can let you delay some of that parsing of JavaScript that the browser has to do. Does that make sense? So getting in lazy loading. Who here in AngularJS uses OC lazy load? Okay, couple. Who's not using OC lazy load? Like AngularJS folk. Okay, you don't have to raise your hand. It's fine. Who here in Angular land is lazy loading? Okay, who's not lazy loading? All right. So when you see some of these performance things we just talked about, lazy loading is a fantastic solution to get some performance back, and it pays double. Let me explain why. Because if I have to download, let's just say you have a fantastic piece that could be lazy loaded. If you have to download that 0.5 meg, that's a lot. That's a big network cost. Okay. And then the browser has to parse it. So it doesn't just like download it and then ignore it. It has to see, is there anything in here I need to immediately execute? Are there any IIFEs that are waiting to fire? So it has to actually parse it as well. So you're paying double on that. So if you can delay that cost till later, till someone actually goes to the route, then you're cooking with that. Or better, if you can delay it until they hover over something that's going to take them to the route, then maybe you can download it before they click on it. So lazy loading, though, is a really good option. It's a thing that people should look at. Memory leak automation. If you can just set up some simple automation that will click around your app circuitously, do it for 15 minutes, save to the database what the memory usage was by the time it was done. And if you can run that every single time someone builds, or run it once a day, then you start to have a history of what our memory usage was. And then when you hire Joe, and this is going to happen, and he makes his first commit, your mem usage goes up through the roof. You can go back and you can start to find the days and the exact commits where these things happen. So memory leak automation is something that can really help you dial into which of us, because it's us, like, you know, we're the developers, which of us is creating the problems. Yeah.
So would you recommend, because we found memory leaks that were in IE11, not in Chrome, or in Firefox, not in any of the other ones that are browser specific. Would you recommend doing this on just Chrome or just in all the browsers you support?
So, I mean, it's kind of baby steps, right? If you're at a company that has none of the things I just said, yeah, just get it going in Chrome for now, right? And then, you know, if you can run it, you know, once for Chrome, once for Firefox, and you can start using some of those Selenium WebDriver things to get more and more coverage, fantastic. But, I mean, at least get something, right? Even if it's like Chrome, which is the best case scenario, even if it's that, like, do that, right? You'll at least find a ton of issues. You might not find all of them. You're not going to find those weird ones that are just IE, right? So yeah, good question. And that's my opinion, by the way. I'm sure that there's other opinions here you could probably daisy chain on. So, okay. And then the last one is get yourself a good component service. Okay? And what I mean by that is get a service that you can say, hey, turn this on when I need it, rather than turn it on before I need it, get it ready in case I do need it, even though 99% of the time I'm never going to need it. Like, get yourself a good component service. And this talk tonight is to help with this last one, because this is one that I don't find readily, like, the talks ready about this on the internet, which is why I was like, I'm going to talk about this. Because you can find memory leak automation talks, you can find lazy loading talks. Tonight we're going to talk about components as a service. So let me show you a couple examples, just so you're like, dude, Frost is crazy. Like, I'm not going to call a service and make a component. Other people do this. It's not just me. It's like, this is just me, like, saying, hey, I'm not the only crazy one. Okay? All right, so Angular material. If you want to open a dialog, this is how you do it. Okay? You get a reference to a dialog service. You pass it the component you want to put in the dialog, and then you tell it to open it. Does that make sense? So rather than declaring the user profile component in your markup, you pass a reference to the user profile component to get it open. Does that make sense? So here's one example of a service call to create DOM. This is ng prime. Does anyone use Angular material? The last slide, anyone use that? Does anyone use ng prime? Okay. So they do this. They have the kind of the similar thing. You want to make some sort of a confirm dialog or some sort of pop-up. You do the same thing. You make a service call, tell it what you want in it, and it will go ahead and take care of it for you. So we're going to go through some code, and I'm going to screw it up, so you guys are going to be patient with me. We're going to walk through an app, and I'm going to kind of get you familiar with the UI. We're going to talk about some of the things going on, some of the things that are happening that you're not seeing, and then I'm going to show you an optimized version of that. This demo is going to be in Angularjs. After that, I'm going to take the same exact concept and I'm going to take it to an Angular app, and I'm going to show how to do this in Angular. So you're going to get examples how to do this in both languages. So hopefully that's cool with everybody. All right. So let's start with Angularjs. Let me get it in view presentation mode. Come again. Here. All right. All right. All right. You guys see this code in the back? Can you guys see this? Yeah, good to go? Okay, cool. So what this is let's actually look at the app real quick before we look at the code. And let me make sure I'm running it real quick. Yeah, it's running. So I don't remember what port it's running on, though. Does anyone remember what port my app's running on?
42.
Is it 42? I actually don't think that's running. HTTP npm run start, please. Oh, I did it. Does anyone else forget to add npm run starts for your presentation? Okay, don't forget, because it makes your presentations harder. So let's go to localhost 4300. Okay. You were close. Thank you, Joe. That's like your that's like on your business card, right? Joe Eames. I was close. Okay. So this sample app. It's got things called channels. In the channels, you put things called messages. Attached to messages are things called user avatars. Has anyone ever used an app like this? 100% of it's true. Okay. Has anyone built one of these? Yeah, you shouldn't. I did. Not this. I did it for my job. It was weird, but I did it again for this presentation, just to kind of talk through some of what's going on. So let me show you kind of what's going on. We got these channels over here, and see this tooltip when I hover over it? He's already going before I hovered. He was just waiting for me to hover, right? Like that got turned on when the app turned on, true? Yeah. So then we got these guys. That tooltip was also turned on, right? So is this one. He was turned on too. So all those tooltips were turned on when the app turned on. Like they didn't wait till I wanted them to happen. Because this is kind of how the bootstrap way does it. It just they bootstrap when the page turns on. And then also, like if I take this message and like I can send a message. Hey Angular Utah. And a message appears. If I click on it, that little pop-up thing, it appeared. Was it on? It was on. You knew it was on. If I click edit, what's gonna happen? Did you guys see that tooltip? He was on too. And when I click on this edit, he was on too. They were all on. And all those things that were on, they were on for each message, right? So every single message had one of all those things on, right? Because that's how we build apps, right? You just put it in an ng repeat or an ng forward. Who cares if it turns on, right? It's Angular, right? It's amazing. So that's modern web. Who's built something like this? Let's be honest. This is therapy right here. This is a safe place. We've all done things like the things I just showed. Okay? Now, so 73 things that didn't need to initted when I turned this app on. Okay? I went into each of them. I was like, hey, why don't everyone just phone home when you turn on? We got 73 things that turned on. Even though there's only like 20 messages, 20 avatars, 10 of these things, like there shouldn't be that many things turning on that don't need to be turned on when the app starts. So I'm going to go into some of this code because I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to show you how I fixed it. I'm going to make the tooltips not turn on until I want them. Okay? What would be the ideal like functionality of a tooltip? Anyone? Can anyone? On hover it shows. What if it didn't even bootstrap until on hover? That'd be good, right? Yeah. What about these pop-up things? What about that? Same thing, right? Don't turn on until I click, right? And then this thing, don't turn on until I click that either. Like none of these things should be turned on until we click. So let me go into the code. All right. So if we do, well, let me check out. This is the version without components as service. Let me do git checkout components as service. What? Oh yeah. Got it. Okay. So so I should have a service down here. I'm trying to remember where all the code went. Let's kind of walk through the code. So if we go to the app component, I'm actually, hold on, I'm just actually going to refresh the page just so we can see real quick. So the number of things in knitting just got cut dramatically, right? And I could cut out most of those still, because some of these things I still turned on accident just to kind of prove a point. But I just cut out 28 things in knitting, and I have the exact same functionality that we had last time. Okay? So this is a huge performance gain for my app. Things like tooltip. Come on, tooltip. You know where you are. Oh, do I have to spell it right? No, it doesn't matter if you spell it right. Oh, I'm in the wrong repo, that's why. Okay. Okay, so there's this directive. Where's my tooltip directive? Yeah, here we are. Okay. So let me show you how I did my tooltips. This is for Angularjs people. Sorry, I'm trying to clear my mouth really quiet because this microphone's crazy. Alright, so here's how I do tooltips going forward. And because tooltips are crazy, I know this is not very Angularly of me, but I don't care because I care more about performance. So that's why I did it this way. So I put a delegate listener on the body. Who knows what a delegate listener is? Anyone? Alright, what it means is I only have one mouse over listener on the whole body. So I don't add a mouse over listener for every single tooltip, I add one. Okay? And what it looks for is anytime I mouse over something that has an attribute of app tooltip. Okay? So I've already got massive performance by cutting out a ton of listeners. I now only have one. Right? And once you hover over that thing, I get the Angularjs injector. I get this position service out of the injector. I make the tooltip. I attach it to the body. I put it into a tooltips array so that I can keep track of it. And later on, I can go ahead and delete it when I need to. I put the position on the tooltip, and then I set an interval every 100 milliseconds. Check to see if they've scrolled or something to see if I need to reposition this tooltip. Okay. So, and then when they mouse out, I clear the interval and I destroy all the tooltips. Does that make sense? So it's like the easiest, most performant tooltip you ever saw. And I just used some things in Angular to get this going. So I took the element and where do I compile it? Update position? No. Element. Oh, that's right. I don't even use Angular. I just use jQuery. I just take this thing. When you pass that to jQuery, jQuery will turn it into HTML for you, right? Has anyone ever done that? It's been a long time since we used jQuery. So that's what that does, for those who don't remember. And it just attaches it to DOM-force. So that's like a really simple, and you can make this to be really, really extensible. This is going to be the most performant, way more performant than Bootstrap's tooltip if you write it this way. Okay, you have to like stifle your stomach bile long enough to accept that you're going to check in code that looks like this. Because who here likes the way this code looks? Yeah, like nobody. Literally no one's hands, just for the record, went up. But this is performant, and sometimes in the name performance, your code looks like this. So this is really, really performant. I did similar things with the modals and the popovers. Like on the message component, I broke its template into like 4 or 5 different templates. Okay, so here's the popover template for when you actually like click on it and it pops up that popover. You guys see that popover template? Okay, so down here, once you click on the message and I want to create that popover. You guys remember what popover I'm talking about? Let me show you real quick. That popover, okay? So when you click on that thing, it calls create popover. Now create popover calls my component service, and it passes it in this object of what I want it to create. Okay? I passed it a template that it's going to compile with Angularjs. an anchor, which is the element I want it to anchor it to, some sort of data, which kind of ends up being the equivalent of the scope stuff for Angularjs, sorry, and then I pass it in. Now, one difference between how you do this with Angularjs and with Angular. With Angularjs, well, what am I passing in for my template? What is this? This is a string, right? This is just a string. That's because Angularjs, the compiler goes down to the browser with Angularjs, okay? So you don't have to pre-compile your templates. Now, in Angular, if you're doing it, you know, the way we've all been like talked at, you're not shipping the compiler to production. So you're not actually going to give it a string template like this. You're going to give it a component definition. It's like if you have a component called donuts component, you're going to pass in the donuts component. And I'll show this in a second, but that's probably the biggest difference between these two approaches. Sorry. Let me go ahead and show what happens when we click on that create component. Now this is Angularjs, and I'm going to show you how to do this in Angular as well. I see a hand.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to connect the dots. So
Sorry.
your components aren't created yet until you click on or hover. Then it runs a function to create instead of pre-created.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first time, here, let me walk you through this. So see all these different template fragments? I have my modal template, my popover template, and then just my regular template. If I say git checkout ng1 no SAS or no pass, if you look at this is just one giant template, right? And this is how we write normally. True? And so these things start to get knitted. Now even if I'm like in Angularjs, even if I ngif it off, it's still on, like it's still, hopefully we're not doing ng show and hide, because that's like the worst one, because all that does is like make it not visible. But if you're doing it the right way with ngifs, the ngif is still checking, and if you have, you know, hundreds of these things, you're still having hundreds of watchers for your ifs. So this component as a service things really starts to help there as well. But over here, this is each message in that in this UI. Each of these messages is just this thing now, right? And then I have my popovers and my modals, and those don't get turned on until they're needed. Okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense why you'd get like exponential performance gains out of this pattern, right? Because when you're just repeating over a thing or you ng loop for over them, and it's turning them all on for each one, like you have multiple modals and multiple popovers for each line, like it just starts to multiply and multiplicatively gets worse, your performance gains, like your performance losses actually. So yeah, so let me go into this function call, sorry, and show you what create component's doing, because the Angular one is doing something very similar. So it takes that options argument that I passed in. Remember I passed in like a template, and I passed in an anchor and the data to bind to the scope. It just kind of takes those things, and if you didn't pass it a template, it fails. It's like, hey, I can't compile nothing. If I didn't pass in an anchor, I'm just going to attach it to the body. Otherwise, I'm going to attach it to whatever anchor you provided for me. And the anchor can be a string, or it can be an actual element itself. It can be like a CSS selector string is what I meant. Sorry. I do a couple like error checking things here to create an API, so that you can, from outside of the component, you can say, hey, go ahead and close yourself. I make a new scope for it. I make an API deferred for that scope. I make the template. I append it to the anchor. I use Angular to compile the template. Now, once it's in the DOM, I then compile it rather than the other way around. And then I attach the scope to it when I'm done. Then I send back this response, which is kind of your API to talk to this component. Does that make sense? So once you've created the modal or the popover, you kind of get this response object back, and you can say response.api.doDestroy. Like if your view's getting destroyed, and you can destroy it that way. Does that make sense what I'm doing here? Anyone confused or have any questions? No? Okay. And you can create anything with a component service, right? Popovers, modals, drop-downs, tooltips. You could even create actual pieces of the app with it. Now, there's some things that make more sense for code cleanliness to do inside of an NGF, but when you start to have performance issues, you'll see some areas where this is going to make a lot of sense. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and check out. Does anyone have any Angular.js questions? Because I'm going to go into the same exact example for Angular. Any other questions? No? Before I move on? All right, I'm going to move on then. Hold on, how do I get out of presentation mode on that guy? Exit presentation mode. Okay. So let's go to this guy. Okay, so I'm going to show you another app real quick. It's running on 4200. This is an Angular app. Okay, this is an Angular. So what's going to happen here is there's an element that's not in the DOM right now. When I click this, it's going to put it in the DOM. That's exactly what we've been talking about all night, right? So that's what happened. It's called a dummy component. Okay, you can make yours called whatever you want to call it. Mine's called dummy. It doesn't do anything cool besides compliment my friend who helped me out with this presentation. So let me go ahead and show you the service, like what's happening in this code, because it might seem mystical. So view, and a presentation mode, and that goes back to the old one. Perfect. Okay. So if we go to the app component, let's look at this app components template. So this template's pretty simple. Can everyone agree? It's just got 2 buttons with click handlers. That's all it's got. I tried to dummy this down because the concepts get a little advanced. So when I click on that first button, it's just going to do show custom thing. Okay. So let's go into that component and find show custom thing. All right. So we got it. So this is show custom thing right here. This is all it takes to dynamically create this component. I make my context, which is equivalent to your inputs and outputs. Okay, because you have to give inputs and outputs when you create a component. So the contexts are things that are going to be bound to inputs and outputs on the component. So if I have an input named title, which my app dummy component does, I make a context and I put title on it. Okay, and then this service, this spawn service, that create component, it's going to wire up. It's going to say, hey, he passed me title. There's an input called title. I'm going to hook him up. If you pass in a function handler, it's going to say, okay, he passed me a function. There's an output with the same name. So it wires them up for it. Does that make sense? What's going on there? Kind of. I see some of this stuff just like clear as mud, right? Okay. So and then so I pass it. When I call create component, I say make this component, attach it to this part of the DOM, and this is the context, meaning this is the inputs and outputs object. Okay, this is my interface into that thing. And so here I've kind of proven I can create one, but does it have the kind of input binding and output binding that we want to see in a regular Angular component? So let me kind of show you this. So if after we've created this component, if we say go ahead and update the context.title. Sorry, let me go back and I need to explain one more thing before I do this real quick. Okay. So it gave me back this spawn reference. Okay. This spawn reference is how I interact with this component now. Okay. Because it spawned a thing, and now I have a reference to the spawned component. Now, if I ever need to talk to that component, if I want to pump new data down to its inputs or outputs, I can just call next, because what I got back was the behavior subject. So I can just say .next some new information into that. So if I do a set interval, and I change the context title to some number, right? This one's going to start at 0 and then just kind of count up every 100 milliseconds. And then if I set that on the context and I say spawnref.next and I pass it the new context, you're going to see that it's going to go ahead and it's going to start updating that. So we at least can pump new data down into it, right? So can we get an event to emit back out of it, though? That's a different question. So let's go down into the code. So remember in our template, we had a second button that said show another thing. So that second button's going to do something very similar. It's going to add the same exact component, but it's going to have an extra thing attached to it. So this time I'm giving a title of another thing. You can see, well, the title gets overridden by this stupid set interval. Sorry, 1 second. Let me count this out real quick. Okay, so I got my other thing component here now. Now one interesting thing about this one is I sent in an onClick. Now, if we go look at this app dummy component, he has an output called onClick. So if I pass in an onClick function handler, it's going to wire up my output to that. So when you click on the title, it's going to go ahead and pump this output. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and emit this event, but when you look at this output, all it does is console log as the output's called. So this is proving I passed in an output handler, and when I clicked on the thing, it called my output handler. So, right? So we can see that it's calling the output handler over here. That output call is what's getting called. Okay, so that's kind of how this thing works. Now, does anyone want to see the code of the component service? It's kind of wonky. Like if you ever need to do this, you're probably going to want to like copy and paste this service out of my repo, because it took me a while to figure out how to do it. So yeah, this definition is exactly what I wanted it to go to. Come on, thing. Response service. Okay. So anymore, I use Prettier in my projects. I did this code before I used Prettier, so I apologize for the ugliness of the code. It should be prettier, I'll admit it. But this is like a shame-free area, right? There's no shame in this room? Okay. Tons of shame? Shameful? Shame plus plus? Okay. So, when we call create component, this is what the function is doing. On the service itself, it gets a component factory resolver. Okay. Now, it needs a component factory resolver because I'm going to pass it a component reference, like this dummy component. I'm going to pass a pointer to this class right here. Okay. At compile time, Angular went ahead and it made component factories for all my components. So I need to get this component factory resolver. So when I give it a component, it can give me the factory back, making it so I can create one of these on the fly. I'm also going to have an application reference, which is a reference to the entire Angular app, and then I need the injector as well. So this is kind of the basic makeup of my component creation class. When you call create component, you have to give it the type, so it's the class of the thing. You can optionally give me a view container reference. That's kind of the anchor. If you give me a view container reference, I'll attach the thing I create to that. Otherwise, I'm going to attach it to the body. Okay? And then the last thing you're going to give it is the context, which, as we've talked about, the context is kind of an object that represents the inputs and outputs. So once we get into this code, it goes ahead and it pulls the factory from the component factory resolver. So now I have this factory. With this factory, I can create a copy of this component. So then I say, if you gave me a view component ref, I say to the view you told me, I say go ahead and create one of these components with this factory. Create a component with the factory I'm going to give you. And it will go ahead and create the component for me. If you didn't give me a view container ref, meaning you want me to attach it to the body, then I use the factory to create it. And all I have to give it is the injector. That's super confusing. That took me forever to figure that out. I know it's like 6 lines of code, but that was confusing because there's no documentation for this crap. Okay? All right. Once I've created the component without the view container ref, then I have to use the app ref to attach it to the app view. Okay? And then I attach it to the body. It's kind of that's the most confusing part right there, and we're not even into the wiring up of the inputs and outputs. But that was kind of that's the crux of the magic right there. Okay? In Angularjs, this was a lot more lines of code. In Angular, it's just a few lines of code. Okay? After this, I go ahead and I wire up the inputs and the outputs. For that, I give it the factory, the component ref, and the context. The reason I have to get rid of the factory is because the factory has a list of all the inputs and outputs on that component. So it gives me a map where it's like, hey, you have an input with a key of, you know, donuts. I'm like, so if I give it a context with donuts, it's like, oh, I know that goes here. If I have an output called foo, and it sees a function called with the key of foo, it goes, all right, that's your output, and it wires them up. So I go ahead and I wire up the outputs. And I get an array of subscriptions that I can go through and call and unsubscribe to all that stuff. Then, if you pass me a context, your context can be, remember what my context was? Here. My context is just a kind of a plain old JavaScript object. You could optionally pass in an observable. Okay, so if you gave me an observable, my component will just take your observable and it will just subscribe to any changes that happen. If you don't, then I create a behavior subject that I'll give back to you that you can then use to pump new data into it. So I either let you create your own observable with data, or I'll give you one back that you can then use to pump new data into this thing. After that, I do a bunch of subscribing to the context stuff, wire up the inputs and outputs. I make a detach function, and then I give you back an API with the detach and the .next call so you can pump new data into it. The detach is what you use in your onDestroy. You're going to want to detach anything you created in your component. You're going to want to detach it. Otherwise, what's that called? Memory leak. Yeah, you're going to leak memory. You're going to leak DOM. So yeah. Anyway, this is the totality of my presentation. So if you guys have any questions, you can get a hold of me this way. Some of this demo code's out on my GitHub. That spawn service, it's out on NPM. So if you want to use it, pull requests are accepted. So yeah. If there are any other questions, anybody? All right, thank you.